Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in the beautiful Inland Empire. We are joined by Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. So, sir, I admit that I often crow about Riverside and its fiscal intelligence, fiscal prudence. Maybe this time I can't crow. I don't know. I don't want to think that my Riverside has fallen down. But, you know, it's all good. It's all good. But let's say what's happened, at least. Back in June, we expected there to be a budget surplus of $1 million, which in the scheme of things is not a lot. A budget of almost $1 billion.
Right.
But now it looks like maybe there is a budget deficit of $8 million. Again, not a ton, but you know, this is Riverside. You're supposed to be like the pinnacle of fiscal purity.
Yes.
Aren't you glad you came on today?
Absolutely.
Exactly. So I don't want to make too much out of it, but let's talk through it.
Yes. Well, you know, I think it's just, you know, we've got new people on board with our city management, you know, executive management, and I think it's a sharper view and a more realistic view. I think the flavor of the whole thing is we're looking at things more realistically, and I don't want to say it's a philosophical change, but in a way, that's what this whole thing is, and people are going to go, okay, $8 million, don't tell me that's philosophy.
Right.
But what it is we're looking at, look, if different monies are coming in from the county with property tax and other revenue coming in, other revenue streams that come into the city, okay, what is the very minimum number that will come in?
Right.
And if that's what it is, let's not bank on what probably is going to come in, and hopefully will come in, but let's bank everything on the worst possible scenario so that we're in the best sound physical shape as possible.
So you don't think there's malfeasance here? You don't think there's a cover-up?
No.
I mean, this is not that. We're dealing with maybe just some antiquated views or policies, and we need to kind of update how we look at this.
Yeah, and I think with malfeasance, you know, there's a lot of members of the public, or not a lot, but some of the people that are usually following, you know, government closely in this, and some of the folks that are frequent speakers and critics, you know, they're like, they want a head on a stick, and they're very upset with things. Yeah, and I don't think there was any malice or any bad intent. I think it was an overall culture of how we looked at things, and most of the time these projections would come in, what we were looking at, you know, hopefully. But we shouldn't be hopeful. We should be, you know, when it comes to money, you got to be conservative and pessimistically.
With a small c.
Yeah.
I do want to, though, talk about a few elements, because we can't point to a few items and say, this is where we may have had a problem. The first being the police contract.
Yes.
You're a former cop, so I'm sure you're aware of these labor negotiations. I guess it came in about $4 million more than anticipated.
Well, actually, it was $4 million more than was budgeted. I mean, here they ran over and didn't finalize the contract, and we went beyond the time, so they were operating off the old contract, which means if you do give a raise, you're going to give some money in the rears. So that was not budgeted for with the last administration, knowing that we were going to move into a raise, you know,
look,
position.
Obviously this isn't an act of malfeasance or criminality, but this was an act of, what, poor planning?
I guess you could say that, and maybe just bad projections, and maybe just as our new assistant city manager in charge of finance says, you know, there was a culture of looking at things in a much different lens than what we feel that we should look at it now.
Let's talk about fire, because we also know that fire overspent a bit, about $2.5 million.
Yeah.
That can happen.
It can.
And again, I don't want to make too much of this, but $2.5 million, it's a nice little chunk to overspend. I mean, I'm trying to think. I know we've been in a drought, and we haven't had the El Nino we had hoped for.
Right.
Have there been a lot of fire incidents?
You know, it's not necessarily about fire, because the highest percentage of what, you know, the Riverside Fire Department, you know, responds to is medical aids. You know, you can have an influx or a number increase of a lot of maybe heart attacks, or maybe people are pushing the 911 button at some of these assisted living places more than they should, and they should be calling some of those interfacility transports. But the thing is, you know, some of these things are hard to project for, and if you spread that $2 million out over an entire year of responses, and we're having fire trucks breaking down and equipment that has not been replaced in a long time, so there's a lot of maintenance costs that are starting to zoom that weren't really planned for.
Let's talk about water, because this is a fascinating discussion.
Put that on fire, right?
Put that on fire, right. So here we are in California, and I must applaud our fellow Californians for conserving during this drought.
Yes.
But in a perverse way, that conservation hurts the bottom line of utilities.
Absolutely.
And in the case of Riverside, the city of Riverside because the city of Riverside owns its utility.
Yes.
Because less product is being used, less water.
Right, less revenue being generated.
Right, and as a result, I guess there's a deficit or a projected deficit of about $1.5 million on the water side.
Yes, actually I think it's probably going to end up going a little bit higher.
Okay,
yeah.
So look, there are some utilities that are increasing water rates, much to the anger and chagrin. You know, it's hard to, well, because you've been conserving water, we have to increase water rates? That doesn't make sense.
And that's what just really tears people up is they think, wait a minute, I'm being penalized because I conserved the water the way I was supposed to. But again, this was the governor applying a one-size-fits-all on top of Riverside, who is water independent from our basin.
Well, that actually is an interesting point. Because,
and we have plenty of water now.
Right.
And it gets replenished a lot of times in the summertime with summer storms on, you know, San Gorgonio.
But what we know is slightly off topic, but important to discuss is that, yes, under the governor's water conservation plan, a city can only be deemed, I guess, independent if the water they get is from surface.
Yes.
And
hence our lawsuit.
And which is percolating, if I can say right now, and Riverside gets its water from groundwater, so there was a desire.
And the interesting thing is the way our water works, is our groundwater moves through that Santa Ana Basin, and if you could just picture that it's just below the surface instead of above, but it is moving through in these, you know, aquifer in different, you know, positions.
But last month, I believe, or within the last few months, the State Water Board did adjust some of the targets.
A little bit.
And did it help Riverside?
It will. I think it's going to come down potentially like 2 percentage points, which will help a bit.
Sure.
And most of the municipalities were close, but they weren't at their goal, which I don't know if the goals were set higher than what was really attainable so that people would try to get there. It was aspirational. Don't know.
It can also be frustrating when we're looking at this deficit that Riverside owns its utility.
Yes.
And even though the utility we just mentioned is bringing in less money, they still have a significant surplus.
They do, and that's important, but you know, it can start whittling away relatively quickly, you know, if this persists and the condition exists.
But look, you know, we're all in this together.
Absolutely.
You know, Riverside owns its utility, so should Riverside, the city, not be able to turn to its utility, which it owns, and take some money?
Well, it's set up by law with the, you know, the Prop 218 and others that the courts have ruled that in essence, it becomes a tax if you were to take money out of your utility that had been garnered through rates and then funnel that money into your city. Even though it's the benefit of having your own utility, you know, for a city, you would think that that would be wise, but what happens is, you know, it's the fear that government will start siphoning off the money, raising the rates, and instead it's a way of making up for like Prop 13.
What about dipping into reserves, or is now the time to bolster reserves?
I'm always one for bolstering reserves to keep them where they need to be because we don't know when our next earthquake, calamity, or other event is going to be. But we do have a very aging pipe system throughout Riverside that could go at any time, and we need to start a very active replacement program. So that money is probably going to end up being partially used for that, as well as normally pipe replacement is through bonding generally. But I think we're trying to balance that out, keep the rates down, and
but okay, so in the final analysis, I think this story got play because Riverside has had such success.
And the numbers went up so dramatically.
And again, during
it was more thought. It was more of a mental picture.
But be that as it may, where do you go from here on this question? I mean, like you said, the deficit may never even result because the monies will come in as predicted in a more optimistic view.
Right, and if they do, that just means that we are, you know, remain on this fiscal prudent track, and that we continue to save and we continue to pay down any debts and we continue to plan a little bit better. And with this new administration, when they go to
and you mean the new city staff?
Yes, and the executive management, when they go to project for their next budget, that because they inherited this, that they are going to be on track and they will prevent this thing from happening in the future.
Thanks for indulging me. His name is Mike Soubirous. He is a member of the Riverside City Council. We're in the Inland Empire today on Charter Local Edition.